All right, everybody. Let's continue on muscles of the shoulder. First of all, is there any questions, clarifications? I mentioned that I'm taking my time because there's a lot of stuff happening here. So if there's any questions, clarifications, let me know in real time. Today we're going to start off with the deltoid. Now, the deltoid is one muscle. I mean, you got one on your right, you got one on your left, but it's one muscle. It's a fan-shaped muscle. So when someone says, I'm working deltoids, plural, that just means right and left at the same time. That doesn't mean all the different parts. We have precedents for this. Gluteus medius and minimus is a fan. We have anterior fibers, middle fibers. Upper chest, it's a fan-shaped muscle, and you have different areas you can recruit for different motions. The cool thing about fan-shaped muscles is that all of the fibers, and when we get into the scapula, we're going to see some crazy fans. The trap is fascinating muscle that has weird fan shape. All of the fibers have something in common, or it'd be a different muscle. But not all the fibers have everything in common. Okay? So when we say anterior deltoid, that's not a separately innervated muscle. That's a area, just like Acadiana is an area of the state of Louisiana. It's an area of the one muscle. All of the fibers, anterior, middle, I think that's important. Let me make sure they use the correct verbiage. Don't. So most of the non-artistic, because you got to remember too, guys, sometimes people do art and they're just doing the art. We say middle. And the reason we say middle delt is because lateral is the outside of the arm and medial is the inside of the arm. Remember, side of a side? So you can't have something that's on the lateral side be medial. But middle, medial, it kind of sounds the same. So I think that's where we, might accidentally say medial deltoid. But medial is a reference. So if there's a medial, there's be a lateral. But it makes sense, the middle, it's in the middle. There's some anterior, there's some posterior, there's in the middle. Makes sense. So let me make sure that our verbiage is anterior, middle, posterior. So the deltoid is one muscle. And that muscle has different sections that all have something in common. What they have in common is all of the fibers of the deltoid are abduction pullers. They're all lateral flexion pullers. They're abduction pullers, all of the fibers. The anterior fibers have a clavicular origin. The middle is more of a chromium of the scapula, and the posterior is on the spine. So you see all this red right here. That's all deltoid origin. And the insertion, again, not that I'm not asking you to know geography, I'm asking you to know function, direction of pull. See this big blue part right in the middle of the humerus? That's where your deltoid is. Now, leverage-wise, we talked about how closer to is good for speed and further away is good for force, and they trade off. More speed, less torque, more torque, less speed. So having this muscle kind of right in the middle, that tells me it has a little bit of both. Not too fast, not too, so power is a good indicator. It's almost kind of like that's your upper extremity glute. It's kind of attaching, kind of not too close, not too far. So mechanically, right in the middle helps give it some contributions. So if I ask you, yes, what is the function? Function of the deltoid, singular, as is just an abduction pull. Then we'll get into the anterior fibers have unique pull sagittally and transversely, and the posterior fibers But think of it like this too, guys. If this was anterior, middle, and posterior, anterior and posterior are going to cancel out sagittally, and they're going to cancel out transversely, and they're going to work together synergistically, as we call it, to kind of similar, not the same, kind of similar to how the rotator cuff muscles together, but independently they can, when they work together, they can do something together. All right. So the anterior fibers, the front fibers, the anterior fibers cross anteriorly. They cross the shoulder in the front. And they also try to spin the merry-go-round medially, internal rotation. The posterior is the mirror opposite. It crosses posteriorly, so it's going to be an extension puller and a lateral or external rotation puller. And again, when I need all of them, that's convenient that the anterior and posterior can cancel each other out transversely and sagittally and work synergistically in the frontal plane. Tensor fascia line, flexor, abductor, internal rotator. All right, so let's go to our function and our circle. So remember, this is a little tricky. The red circles is telling you this is one muscle. But that block, the anterior deltoid, does cross anteriorly. It does sit in the front of class. So even though this is one muscle, the whole muscle doesn't sit the fence. That's what I was trying to explain with this. This is one muscle, but the anterior fibers do cross anterior to the bilateral axis, and the posterior fibers do cross posterior to the bilateral axis. The anterior fibers are trying to spin the right shoulder medially or internally. The posterior fibers are trying to spin the shoulder externally or laterally. And when both of these work together to cancel out each other sagittal and transverse, then they can work synergistically to just pull lateral or an adduction pull. Any questions on how I have it visually listed and also verbally listed? The deltoid, all heads, shoulder abductor, the anterior portion of that fan pulls like this. Obviously, I didn't go redundant, so shoulder flexor and internal rotator is in addition to the abduction. Does that make sense? That's why it's like subclassified. So the abductor pull is for all of them, and then this anterior crosses this way and the posterior crosses that way. So that's in addition to. PowerPoint says, okay, so this does it all. So that's the abduction pull, the lateral cross, the anterior. This is the sagittal pull of the anterior. This is the transverse pull of the anterior. Good. Middle. teres minor, and subscat are rotator cuff. We talked about the short head and the long head of the biceps brachii. Now I'm going to give you a sister muscle to the short head of the bicep brachii, the coracobrachialis. Now we had sister muscle concepts at the ankle. Remember the peroneus longus and brevis, where they basically have the same functions at a particular joint or joints. So the coracobrachialis and the biceps brachii, short head, cross the shoulder the same way. That doesn't mean they have the same function everywhere, because as you can tell, the coraco doesn't go anywhere near the elbow and the radiolar joint. But at the shoulder, they cross in the exact same way. This is a good, different muscles have different names for different reasons. Some muscles have Latin origins, sartorius, popliteus, soleus. And some muscles have, which I wish they all did, but have names that have pull in them, adductor, magnus, the supinator. And then some muscles have origin insertional names, so like sternocleidomastoid. So this is an example. Coracoid process to the brachial part of the brachial. That coracoid process is a part of the scap. So the coracobrachialis, if you're a lister, coracobrachialis, shoulder flexor, as it crosses in front. If you're a circular, coracobrachialis, sitting anterior, as it crosses in front, sits in front. If you're a visualer, it's fine, fine. So, whenever you're talking about. What, can you say that last word again? Yeah, the Anconius. Yeah, for the elbow extensor. Yeah, my ears are. Yeah, we're good. That, like you said, stabilize the elbow extension. Well, it's an elbow extensor, but it's angle of pull because remember, muscles aren't just movement influencers; they're also stability influencers, right? So one of the stability components of that muscle is so when so imagine like your tricep is coming down and inserting here. There's really not a lot of obliquity there. So having this extensor that has some more obliquity, like when your elbow is flexed or in different position, in addition to having extension points, also trying to keep humerus onto all of it. If that makes sense. So it gives the elbow extensors some different angles to try to make sure you have joint integrity and something might be trying to dislocate you. So my question was going to be, is the coracobrachialis similar to that? Not, I mean, it has a lot of similarities in terms of it's a uni-articular muscle, but your coracobrachialis is, think of it as like a third class, like a class muscle where like the soleus sits on top of, like it gives leverage. So think of it more like the biceps brachii short head gets to piggyback on it to have a little bit better pull when you're trying to fix the thing. So like think of it as superficial deep. It's a great question. stabilize your shoulder. Might be in for a long day. All right, guys. One of the most famous muscles, the pecs. Pecs. The glutes, the quads, the hips, the balls, the legs. All right, first off, you have your pectoralis major, right and left, and that is different than your pectoralis minor. Pec minor is going to be a scapula pulling muscle. So when we say, and I'm just using verbiage because a lot of times, again, like I'm working my deltoids, what does that mean? So when someone says they're working their pecs, plural, a lot of people think that that means like pec major and minor as the plural. And I actually have no problem with that if you were actually doing scapula stuff, and you could say, well, pec major is going to be doing shoulder stuff, pec minor is going to be doing scapula stuff. But really what they're talking about is, well, I'm doing bench, and so I'm working my left and my right, and two singulars is a plural, I'm working my pecs right and left. But the pec minor is not a shoulder pulling muscle because it doesn't cross the shoulder. Yeah, that's the fan right there. You know, look at all the surface area that it's covering. Y'all know what I mean when I say fan, like the geisha fans, like they're like the Oriental fans that you can make into a fan. So that's what I mean by that. Like it fans out. Okay. You have a sternal portion and clavicular fibers, sternal fibers. Some people refer to these as lower and upper. Any fan is going to have all the fibers share common pull. In this case, the pec major and anatomical position share two common pulls, and then there's going to be something different about the upper fibers. So the two common pulls, you can just visualize, like the rotator cuff muscles are on the golf ball itself. This is more on the neck, and this is more on the shaft. So you can visualize like an adduction pull to that muscle, right? Pulling medially, pulling on the inside. So it's an adductor. And then, see if everybody can see these three little blue strips. These three blue strips right there. Three little slits. That's where three separate muscles insert. And I was taught at Auburn a lady between two majors. So lady, we're going to get into the latissimus dorsi. And you can have your pec major here, and you can have your teres major here. But you can imagine, here's this big, powerful fan coming into this blue strip. It's going to be an internal rotation. Make sense? Visualize it. We want to pull medially. Stay. It's like if you were arm wrestling, hey, your biceps trying to keep your elbow from popping out. Your pec major is going to be a big muscle for being an internal rotation. Okay. In fact, you have a lot, I think I mentioned this last class, you have a lot of big, strong internal rotation pulls because that's how we speed up something that's going to make our hand move at 100 miles an hour. Well, not mine. But to make your hand go fast, you have to have big, powerful engine muscles to be internal rotators. So pecs, lats, subscaps, anterior delts. That's the big, powerful internal rotation pulls. All right. The clavicular fibers, and again, this is an artist's drawing, but notice this is why we talked about, we had a little section on angles, angle of inclination. So these fibers are most X in terms of their pull, because although, yes, there's low, blah, 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 look how they come in. This is what's crossing. It's the cross, right? I meant the crossing of the joint, like not religious, like it's the crossing of the joint that's making it pull, adduction, pull, and internal rotation. Now, these fibers come in and cross with an angle of inclination. They come in at a quadrant that's not all in one, right? It's coming in an angle, meaning that it has horizontal pull, these sternal fibers, but it also has vertical. Does that make sense? It has anterior pull, crosses the shoulder anteriorly. So that's why the upper clavicular, KNES, two different forms of the same thing. We just need to make sure we refer to it as the same. So let me scroll up to make sure. Call it pectoralis major, all the fibers, adduction pullers, internal rotation pullers, sternal fibers, and clavicular fibers. Sternal fibers, same as all the fibers, but the clavicular fibers have a shoulder flexion pull because it's at an angle. There's a vertical pull there for the clavicle. Make sense? That's why, like, if you're doing incline bench, you would be targeting more of your upper because now there's an upper pull. So, like, globally, it looks like you're doing the same thing, but locally to your body, you're going across and up. And it's that upward component that's getting the fibers that literally run exactly in that direction. But think about it, if you were doing incline relative to your body, you're literally doing this. And that's exactly how it's run. All right. Let's talk about switch and function. We have precedent with the brachioradialis, midway muscle. When you are in anatomical position, pectoralis major is an abduction pull because really it's just pulling in a direction of, hey, humerus, come visit me over here in the sternum plasma. However, if you remember how in 310 I taught you that abduction is going to go with external rotation to clear the humeral head to give you more. You can't do this. You'd be articulating with the back of the humerus. When you go sagittal, that works. But if you go frontal, that's a bad day. So you have to do this with this in order to get there. Remember that? Okay. So watch this trick. Lady between two majors. Here's my pectoralis major. Below 90 degrees, adduction pull. But we also know over our head, usually we need some strong muscles to do overhead pressed up. So watch how the pectoralis major can help. Below 90 degrees, adduction pull. When I abduct, and I go into this position, awesome. Like if I'm doing a bench press or doing cable flies, great. But if I go past 90 degrees, well, now that muscle's still trying to pull into the sternum. But guess what? It's an abduction puller now above 90. Make sense? So under 90, abduction puller. Past 90, abduction puller, which is a great help when I'm trying to do press things over my head. The pectoralis major is like, dude, I can help you. I could be an abduction puller past 90 degrees. Now, the reason it's not in your circles, because your circles are in anatomical position, that in anatomical, it's going to be an adduction pull. You need to know that past 90 degrees, now it can switch its function and be an abduction pull. Globally, it's still doing the same thing. It's just trying to bring your humerus to the middle of your body. But past 90, if you guys remember, you remember how some students had a problem remembering ab and adduction because they made it all about the midline? You remember that? So like on the test, I might say, hey, what's this? And they may say like, oh gosh, they both went to the midline. It's not, globally, this muscle is trying to bring your arm to the midline. But down here, that's an adduction pull. And up here, it's an abduction. Make sense? I'm in a you know, like they have fantasy football, fantasy baseball, like you have a fantasy football team, I'm in a fantasy gymnastics league. And we draft gymnasts. Oh, yeah, it's real big. But one of the, as a biomechanist, I'm really fascinated with all kinds of sports and during the Olympics especially. So like one of the events for the men's is the rings. They get on the rings. And one of the moves they do is an iron cross, and you get more points if you can like go vertical. Like, you know, like in other words, you get less points if your arms were kind of down here. And one of the reasons is full vertical, yes, your moment is greater. But also down here, you get to use your pec as an adductor to help prevent the rings from abducting you. But as soon as you go here, now that pec isn't an adductor anymore. That's a huge muscle that you're excluding from that agonistic group. So it's a lot harder. So yes, your moment is greater here externally, but also you lose the effects of a big, powerful adductor when you're below. Stuff like that. Let's see what the PowerPoints this stuff. Now remember, guys, these motions has nothing to do with agonists. It's just showing you the pull. It's showing you direction of pull. In fact, if the skeleton was doing these motions, like the pec wouldn't be an agonist at all, right? Because you would need your abductors, not adductors. Does that make sense? All it's showing you is direction of pull. How does it pull? Show you some stretch stuff too, right? Okay, there's my clavicular fibers. I'm hoping that should make sense. Like, only the ones at the top can pull the humerus up. Sense? So, all the fibers, just the upper pulling fibers. And y'all guys, you'll learn about motor units, right? You know, you have a nerve and it innervates the different fibers, and a motor unit is one motor neuron and all the different fibers in it. Motor units don't scatter throughout a muscle. They're very localized. They're very localized. So that's why you can selectively recruit certain parts of that fan. You don't have one nerve and then a fiber there, a fiber there, a fiber there. Do you remember the all or none principle? Is that ever introduced to you? That was always confusing because some of my instructors made it seem like an all or none was like the muscle itself. I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, I don't have to. All or none is for every motor unit. So it's just the individual motor unit, and then you could recruit more to increase your. So it's not the whole muscle has to be all or none. But that motor unit, once it, I forgot the term used back in the day. Yeah, once it depolarizes, it's gonna go to just the fibers that one nerve goes to. So all or none is just per motor unit. Triceps, pretty good. All right, you guys, so we talked about the triceps at the elbow extensor, and the long head of the tricep is a adductor. So look at the socket, the glenoid fossa, that socket, the dog teeth. that the golf ball sits on. That triceps great guy is, if that tricep came and like started at like the spine, then it would have like a posterior pull. But it's literally coming right up underneath. It's right here. So it doesn't have a posterior crossing to do shoulder extension, but it does have a medial crossing to do shoulder adduction. It's an adduction pull. Does that make sense? And I think I mentioned this last class. I think the reason why people give credit to the tricep is like an extensor, or because usually when you have a straight arm, your tricep is working to prevent elbow flexion. Like think about like if you're doing this, or if you're doing this on a machine, that machine is trying to do this to your elbow. So your tricep would naturally be on as an elbow extensor to create a rigid link. But in terms of torque or moment, that long head of the tricep is really tucked up underneath that golf ball. So there's really no posterior crossing. It's sitting on the anterior, posterior, I'm sorry, it's sitting on the bilateral axis. Speaking of stability, that makes sense too, right? Trying to keep that golf ball on the golf tee, kind of having this muscle yoinking up vertically. It's a good visual. This isn't your power class. Oh gosh, the lag is not very. Gonna do the loud one there. Yoink. Does everybody see what I'm saying? Like it doesn't have the posterior crossing of like the posterior deltoid, right? It's pulling medially, but it just doesn't cross in the back enough to try to bring your arm up. So again, I think the misunderstanding is when you're doing like these type of exercises, like, well, I feel it in my tricep. It's like, well, yeah, your tricep is working overtime to prevent reflection that's happening when you're doing a straight arm exercise. So let's go back to for my visual learners. Biceps brachii short head, shoulder flexor, coracobrachialis, sister muscle, biceps brachii short head, shoulder flexor, biceps brachii long head, anterolateral, shoulder flexor, abductor. Our deltoid is an abductor. The anterior fibers can also be flexors, medial, internal rotators. Our posterior fibers, in addition to being abductors, extensors, external lateral rotators. Supraspinatus, abductor rotator cuff. Subscapularis, internal rotator cuff. Teres minor, infraspinatus, lateral pulling rotator cuff. Triceps brachii long head, adduction pull. Our pectoralis major, one muscle with different fibers, one muscle, different fibers. So all of the fibers in anatomical, I think this is important, all of the fibers pull in the direction of adduction. All of the fibers pull in the direction of internal rotation. Only the clavicular fibers cross anteriorly, meaning shoulder flexion. Make sense? And then the final two we'll get to on Monday. Lat dorsi. I might spend 30 minutes on this. It's a very important muscle to function and to human movement and the sport and exercise. And then in the shoulder, it has a sister muscle called the teres median. So those are last. Any questions? Good. Yeah. Oh, yeah. The last part of class is our scapula pullers. And I saved the scapula pullers for last because the circle, the cross sectional isn't the same. We can't look at the scapula like we would here because it sits like this. It's not really a joint, it's an articulation. So we're gonna look at it literally from the back. So like the posterior, so you can see muscles that pull, elevation pullers, compression pullers, retraction pullers, protraction pullers, upward and downward rotation. So yeah, we're gonna get into those. Those will be the last ones. What if I'd been like, no, I just need them? Those muscles wrong me as a youth. That's a great question. All right, guys, you have a good one.